Here's inspiring philosophy talking about atheists.
How do you respond to the hiddenness of God, this argument? And I'm not going to get, you can still man it for me, but the idea being, if God exists and wants me to be saved, and I need to accept that salvation in some capacity, then I need to first at least know that he exists. Mm-hmm. And yet there are atheists who really would believe in Jesus Christ and God if they could.
Would they? I mean,
there's something we don't know how to. How could you can't answer that.
You can't answer that, yeah. I mean, human psychology is so complex. When an atheist tells me, if you just gave me the evidence, I'd believe, I go, uh-huh. That's not how your brain works. That's not how we work as humans. This isn't the way it is. Don't give me this nonsense that if I just gave you the evidence, you'd change your worldview. We know from studying the brain that when your beliefs are attacked, even little beliefs, the lizard part of your brain lights up. Flight or flight response.
Now, there are a couple things I could say about this, but I want to be very precise because this is supposed to be an objection to the hiddenness argument. The idea behind the argument is that there is an incompatibility between a loving God on the one hand and the existence of non-resistant non-believers on the other. A non-resistant non-believer just being a person whose absence of belief in God is not caused by resistance of God. Keep in mind that this refers to more than just atheists, but to anyone who doesn't believe in God as traditionally defined. Now, since I've unpacked the argument elsewhere, I won't do that here, but instead I'll link to that video in the description. But let's turn our focus on what Jones appears to be pushing back against, that non-resistant non-believers exist. So what's his objection to the existence of this class of people supposed to be? Basically, it's just, we know people are biased and tend to have a hard time revising their beliefs, especially cherished ones. So presumably, we can't really say with confidence that such individuals exist. Now, it's not really clear to me whether he's saying this as a definitive objection to the hiddenness argument, or merely a caution. But either way, the objection is underwhelming. A couple things to note. First, this kind of reply seems to be assuming that you need to establish the existence of non-resistant non-believers with 100% certainty in order to make a persuasive case that they exist, which is just false. Good evidence that they do can be found both in modern testimony and, quote, in all those from earlier stages of human evolution, tens of thousands of years before theistic religions like Christianity came on the scene, who didn't believe in God because they didn't so much as have the idea of an all-powerful, all-knowing, all-good personal God, or believed in other things instead, which seemed as obvious to them as God seems to many today. If theological ignorance is the cause of your not believing in God, then resistance is not the cause, and so the non-belief of these people who lived, as it were, before doubt, is a clear example of non-resistant non-belief. End quote. On my view, the only real way to dispute this point about our ancestors is... But I'll continue pointing out problems with Jones's reasoning, because it still fails even if we stick to the data of modern testimonial evidence. Notice next that this kind of thinking cuts both ways, as they seem to admit later in the clip. But think of the implications of this. If Jones's objection succeeds in undermining our confidence in the existence of non-resistant non-believers, then it should equally undermine our confidence in the existence of any believers worthy of being called open-minded. In Jones's world, a fellow atheist could come up to me and say, yeah, I know people are only religious because they fear death, but what do you make of the ones that seem pretty open to exploring these topics and going where the evidence leads them? And I could just fold my arms and smugly say, are they, though? While I definitely believe some religious people are rationalizing their beliefs, it seems implausible for me to infer from that there are no religious people that I can coherently speak of as being willing to change their mind, or who are genuinely open to being wrong. Closely related to this, think of how radical a view this is towards mundane human testimony. When atheists say that they would be willing to change their mind under certain conditions, according to Jones, you should either be extremely skeptical or not believe them at all. Now, to be clear, he is 100% correct that people are biased, but the amount of skepticism he thinks we should have towards testimony as a result of this is completely unwarranted. Consider a belief that people would have an extremely hard time giving up, like my partner is faithful to me. We all know we have the capacity to be blinded by love and loyalty, but even so, that belief is given up by people all the time. So if you asked a friend a weird hypothetical like, if you had enough evidence, do you think you'd be convinced your spouse was cheating on you? And they said, yes, I see no reason not to treat that testimony as innocent until proven guilty, since, again, it's a pretty mundane claim. Jones also mistakenly speaks as though every person wants all of their beliefs to be true, or at the very least, that they want their worldview to be true.
You do want all your current beliefs to be true. I want all my current beliefs to be true.
Now, why on earth should we think that's true in every case? Consider a picture of Christian universalism, where there is some kind of temporary period of justice and refinement, but that everyone will ultimately be reconciled to God and enjoy Him forever in a new creation. I'd venture to guess that tons of Christians would like that to be true, but don't believe it for reasons not related to that desire. Similarly, as an atheist, I want that to be true, but don't believe in God or Christianity for reasons not related to that desire, and I'm not alone there. So clearly, people are capable of believing things against their desires. J.L. Schellenberg summarizes what Jones is trying to do here and why it fails quite nicely. Quote, "In response, you'll hear the believing prosecutors talk about how doubters could have been inattentive just when God was trying to get through. They could have been looking for a particular kind of evidence, easy to manipulate or control, or pridefully demanding more evidence for God than they would look for in other contexts. Perhaps because they want to have control over the direction of their lives instead of giving everything over to God. What people who say this sort of thing seize upon is the fact that human beings have many well-advertised flaws and shortcomings. And what they will rhetorically ask is whether any of us can seriously claim that at no level, perhaps deep down, he or she is resisting the demands of a holy God. As a juror in the case, however, you are required to take all such preaching with a grain of salt and keep your eye on the evidence, as well as on the precise question at issue, which is not whether the doubters on trial may have flaws, but on whether they may have been resisting God. And furthermore, not whether resistance of one sort or another may be present, but whether there might be resistance of the specific sort that would remove belief in God. The sort of resistance that amounts to closing one's eyes to the light of God, which would lead a loving God, sadly, to conclude that you don't want a relationship. Even if there are always going to be parts of one's character that fall short of perfection, and even if this means that all of us are at some level resistant to changes that would move us closer to what a God's character would be like, it in no way follows that when people stop believing in God, this sort of thing is always the explanation." End quote. Though Jones is certainly more careful than some apologists, he does have a history of not really grasping what certain arguments are getting at. Tab this video next to me and I'll give another example.